Hey Springfield, my name is Aaron Clark, and what you're about to watch are stories designed to create compassion, care, and love for one another in our community. We all have a story, we all have history, we all have an authentic story, and with that comes good, bad, and the ugly. But when we know each other's stories, when we hear each other's stories, it gives us the capacity to show more compassion and love for one another. So let's check out a video of an authentic story from one of your neighbors. Welcome everyone to another episode of Springfield Stories. I have a wonderful young lady here with me. Share us your name.
My name's Lisa Dunn.
Lisa Dunn. What do you do now?
I am I work with career services at Central State University, so I'm a career specialist, and I help students and alumni with their career search, internship resumes, mock interviews, just get them ready and prepared to succeed.
Wow. How long have you been doing that in that field?
You know, actually, I started April 1st, so no jokes. I transitioned from the TRIO program at Clark State, where I worked with first-generation college students. So I'm really enjoying being in a four-year college with students on campus. It's an exciting, progressive, innovative university. They're really doing some amazing things at Central State.
Wonderful, wonderful. So we know that's where you're at now, but you didn't start here. There's a story, there's a journey that led you up to here. So let's start with that journey. Are you born, what was your childhood? Are you born and raised in Springfield? What's your family dynamic like? And go from there.
Oh, I was born and raised in Springfield. Went to Gray Hill, Hayward, and then to North. So my family, my mother and my father were, we had a very stable household. My mother actually held down two jobs. She worked at Mercy Hospital and she worked at Navistar.
Wow.
Retired from both. Amazing.
How did that,
Well, she worked full-time at Navistar most of our life. But she worked at Mercy at least once a month to keep her seniority. So if Navistar had a layoff, she would pick up hours at Mercy. And she just kept that going, until she could retire from both. Yeah. And then my dad retired from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So we were considered upper middle class. My dad and his father built our home on Innisfallen. And, every year I think my mother had him move the front door 3 times. So they were always building. I love to see things come together. That construction piece is very strong for me.
Yeah. What was it like as a child being raised in Springfield at that time? Like, what was the dynamic like? What was the culture like at that time?
Well, the culture in my neighborhood on the southwest side of town was mostly two-parent families, working, really progressive. We had a lot of my friends attended, the Jack and Jill conventions, and they traveled. We always went somewhere in the summer. We had a very stable life. Now, I will say, lots of secrets in Springfield. Lots of secrets. So I actually, in Gray Hill, I had a lot of friends, just through elementary school. Still have those friends to this day. There was, one experience I have a poem about where my best friend, who was, my size, my age, not my color, we had a great relationship until she had her 8th birthday party. And she gave all of the kids invitations to her party except the black kids.
Oh, wow.
The punchline in the poem is her dad didn't allow no niggas in her house. Wow. And, we had done, I don't know, you're too young to remember when you used to cut your finger and stick it together and
do the little
be
blood.
the blood sister. So we were blood sisters, but, my mom said, after I couldn't go to the party, well, they're just trash anyway. And her dad was saying, we were the N-word, so it just created such a tension and destroyed our relationship. So that was my first experience with racism. And shortly after that, my grandfather shared with us his experience downtown. He witnessed the lynching of Mr. Dixon downtown, and he talked about how that happened and the burning down of the black community's homes and businesses. Tulsa wasn't the only place that happened. Yeah. And so, there's some really racial tension here in Springfield that started, generations ago, and is still unresolved and needs to be addressed.
Do you think that as a child going through that, did it give you another look on other cultures and the white culture? Did that mess with you mentally as a child, to where you grow up and now you're like, looking at them different, or was it just like, that's just their belief, I still love everybody? Or
I wish I was that big. No, I first of all, we always learned about white culture, white history. We got all of that. It made me delve into black history more. I started reading, at a very early age about Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman, Martin Luther King. Learned a lot of the history of the members of our church, because I even attended St. John as a young child. So finding out where those professionals got their start. So I delved more into who I was because of my ancestors and where we came from. So I think it did make me hostile, made me very angry and hurt. But I did, my parents kept books. We had the Encyclopedia Britannica set in the house. So we kept, or was it World Book? But we did, I just focused more on educating myself about what was different and why.
Wow. Do you have any siblings?
I do. I have, there's 5 of us.
That's a big family.
Yeah. There's 5 of us. And then later in life, I found out I have some half siblings. So I have 2 sisters and a brother. Wow. And so that was pretty challenging too, because sometimes you find out the family secrets in public, and I, that happened to me at Hayward, and I wasn't anywhere equipped, to understand that my father, who raised me, adored me, took care of me, actually loved me more than I could even understand. But the message, the devil puts in your ear is, you were a mistake. Yeah. You were unwanted, not you were unplanned. And so really it took time of peace and quiet during COVID, where I couldn't run around and do a whole bunch of stuff, and I had to sit with myself to really see that unplanned does not mean unwanted, and only God can bring life. So that, I really try to talk. I worked with foster children for 10 years, and that's the message I always tried to make them see, that you do have challenges with your biological parents, but it doesn't mean you're not wanted.
Yeah, that's a good message. With the rest of your siblings, what was the dynamic like, with your other sisters and brothers? Not your half sisters, but your biological sisters. I guess they will all be biological,
Yeah.
But
yeah, we were busy. We were just, our parents kept us involved. If we weren't doing church activities, we were involved in sports, basketball, baseball. My dad coached baseball. Mm-hmm. John Marshall Watkins was a baseball coach down at on Dayton Avenue. Mm-hmm. coached for years. After that, he mentored. He worked with, really challenging young men in the community. Tried to teach them trades, like he flipped houses or rented, rehabbed and rented houses out. So he just always was, an extension, extending himself into the community.
Yeah. I ask people often, like, if you, do you feel you were closer to your mother or father, or was it a even balance?
It was probably an even balance. I was super independent. I loved my friends.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, I grew up in that era where, you followed the herd.
Yeah.
So, and my mother was pretty much a homebody. So, of course, she was probably tired from all that working.
Right.
But, she used to say, you don't have to be everywhere with everyone. So, maybe one weekend a month we could go to a party, or we couldn't go every weekend.
Right.
But we did a lot together. We'd go to the movies, as a family. Like I said, we'd do summer vacations. Holidays were huge in our house, and we cooked, and so we were extremely busy.
That's good. That's good. So bringing, childhood, and then you come to high school, and your teens and college years and stuff. But the teens, what, was that experience like for you as a teenager, and what challenges or anything you faced, or, how did you deal with your teenage life?
Yeah, well, my teenage life was pretty rough. I was still grappling with identity and, what does this mean to be unwanted? And, that really stressed me. But I played basketball at North and at Hayward. And so, sports really made me graduate from high school. I don't know if I'd have buckled down and focused as much as I did if it weren't for basketball and the coaches, really watching my grades. But I was really a mess emotionally, but just drifting through the system. Had good friends, very good friends who, again, were friends really to this day. But I always had dreams. We never had a choice about college. My parents always stressed that, after high school, it's college, and that's just what was expected.
Education was expected. Like, academics was really big in that, yeah.
Absolutely. So I wasn't prepared. Academically, I really wasn't prepared. And I remember taking the PSAT test and sitting down with the guidance counselor at North. And he told me that, asked me what I wanted to be. And I said, I wanted to be a lawyer. And he looked at my grades, looked up at me, looked at my grade, looked up at me, and he's like, oh, no. I said, what? He said, mm-mm. He said, you'd have to go to college to be a lawyer. And I said, I know. And he said, and then you'd have to get accepted to law school. And I said, yeah. And he said, and then you'd have to pass the bar exam if you could finish all of that. And that's just impossible. He said, have you considered cosmetology school? And I found out years and years later at a class reunion that a lot of African American students had gotten that same information. And then even some of the white students who he didn't feel were suited for college were told that as well. And, it is so distressing to think that someone in that position of authority would discourage, someone. I was wide-eyed and, excited about the possibility of what I could do. And, that was pretty devastating. So I really watch, how people direct and guide students now.
Yeah.
Maybe why I'm still in education. I don't know.
you said you weren't prepared for, for academia, you weren't ready for college. And sometimes I think, although I think college is great, but I wonder how many high school students feel the same way. Like, I'm about to graduate and I'm going to college because that's what my parents push. That's what everybody say. But I am not ready for it. I don't feel like I'm academically ready, mentally ready, because it takes it's a mental shift, going from high school to college. And then I wonder why, then they get there, then they don't finish, or something happens and they just give up. Did you finish college? Did you go through, or did you find that point where you say, no, I'm just done with it? Or
Well, I went into college on probation. So I went to Wilberforce my freshman year, and I was on the dean's list my entire freshman year, actually all the way through college. Now, I did take a break, and I worked and traveled. And then when I went back to school, I was a dorm director in St. Charles, Missouri. I went to Lindenwood University. And when I was at Lindenwood, because I understood that feeling of not, it's really called imposter syndrome, where you're in a position where any minute somebody's going to expose your success as just dumb luck, and you're going to flunk out or you're going to fail at whatever you're pushing yourself to do. So I tell students college is really easier than high school, because you get to focus on, once you get past your gen eds, you get to focus on what you want to do and what you want to be. So for me, as long as you have good guidance when you get on campus, and that's what I love about Central State. You have so many wraparound services and so much camaraderie that even when you struggle, you have somewhere to go. You're going to struggle. I mean, college is pushing you to that next level. Now, should everybody go to college? Probably not. But if you aspire to do something, it just depends on what's in your heart, what you really want to do professionally. Some things you have to have a degree to do. And then there's other things, right now the trades are really hurting, because they don't have the bricklayers like they used to, the plumbers, and they need people who want to go in that direction. And you can make a lot of money in those professions. But I do a lot of assessments with students, because we spend 13 or 14 years studying everything except ourselves. And if you don't know who you are and what you really want and what your skills, talents, and abilities are, then you're just running in circles. But when you understand that the reason you always argue with people is because you are an advocate,
right,
then you can look at, does that need to be my own business? Do I need to go to the SBDC and get some leadership skills and set up my LLC? Or do I need to go to college? So it's really assessing students at the earliest point possible so that they can determine what their next steps are.
Yeah, that's solid. Because I believe everyone comes with a gift.
Yes.
Everyone, or if you're breathing, you have a gift.
Yes. And a purpose.
And a purpose. And it's up to you to explore and develop and cultivate that gift to be used. And sometimes I feel that a lot of people walk around this earth not knowing their gift, not knowing their purpose, not being fulfilled. Right. And then they just settle for, this is just it, and they just, it's unfortunate, but I do encourage even people, like, what's your passion? What's your purpose? Find it and dive into it, man, and then you could be fulfilled in life. You said something in high school, you said you were, dealing with a lot of emotions. How did you handle that? As a teenager, how did you deal with that?
Really? I got drunk and high. I did.
Yeah.
I mean, I was numbing myself, self-medicating. I hid. And the positive thing I did was I journaled. I wrote all of my anger, distress, confusion. Just wrote it down. And when I was living in St. Louis, a friend invited me to go to a open mic event just to listen to some poets. And, I get there and these people are saying stuff that sounds like what I've written in my journal. So I connected with them and joined the Creative Arts and Expression Laboratory. They called it CALE, and learned how to be a spoken word artist. So all of that anger and rage and joy, there was some happy times in there too, but it ended up producing so much fruit. It was really therapeutic. It taught me a skill that before I left St. Louis, I was actually honored by an organization called the Black Pages. They did an annual booklet of Black-owned businesses, and they honored me as their poet laureate. So, it really took me from just emotionally dumping on paper to crafting that into something that it's like beauty for ashes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow. So you found the outlet to channel all of those emotions, and which is, being a creative guy, a musician. I mean, I thank the Lord for music.
Yes.
Because it gives you a way to channel, and being a drummer, because you can beat the drums and they don't fight back. And you can just, creatively just play and so I understand that outlet, because without that outlet, you said, the drinking and getting high, a lot of people go there because they don't have that outlet to release in other areas,
right,
to release that anger and stuff. So you go to college. Now bring us up to college life. After college life, you have any children? And what was that dynamic coming after that?
Okay, well, after I graduated from college, much to my mother's dismay, instead of going the corporate route, I decided to pursue my art. So I performed, I did African dancing, I did singing with an organization called Ngoma in St. Louis, and we performed every week, and we performed at colleges and universities. And it was really just a free time, kind of like that gap year. It was a couple of years, but I worked in the educational system, after-school programs, which was an amazing learning experience because they had schools that were like our community schools used to be here in Springfield, where after school they stayed open and they had engagement activities, but it was intergenerational. So you may have the mothers at a church in one room making their hats for Sunday service and putting their beads on and sequins and all of that. And then in another room, you had students tutoring elementary school kids. So it was a community that would come together, and it kept students from being at home when they may not be supervised, or giving them just enrichment activities to do after school. So they were doing positive events. So I did that for a few years. And then I had Dorian. I was in a African-centered community, so I had him, left the hospital, came home, didn't even name him before I took him from the hospital. So my family was freaking out because they thought I was in a cult and I lost my mind. But my mother's name was Dorothy Ann, so I named him after her, Dorian. And his middle name is Ajani, which means he who takes possession after the struggle. Wow. And of course his last name is Hunter. So he was my first. He's 26 now. Amazing young man in the community. I'm very, very proud of him and his soon-to-be wife Erica, and my granddaughter Layla. So that's my oldest. And then Trey just graduated from Clark State, got his Associate of Arts degree, and is looking for a 4-year school, which I hope will be Central State University. And my youngest is Evelyn, Evelyn Naomi Dunn, END.
Okay.
So, but she's an entrepreneur, just amazing young woman that is blooming and finding herself. She does hair. She helps a young rapper with his social media. She's just a real go-getter. And I'm very proud of all 3 of my children.
Do you see the same dynamic you had as a child with your siblings? Do you see that with your children?
Oh no. They're very close, emotionally close. I was close to my siblings for the most part, but they're emotionally close. They're heart to heart. I mean, they can almost be across town and feel each other's pain. They're really in tune with each other, very supportive of each other. It's beautiful to watch.
Yeah, I oftentimes I ask that question with, because I know sometimes growing up, if you're close with your siblings and stuff, man, then you have kids, and sometimes it could be the same. Somebody's completely opposite, and so I'm always interested in that. I was close to my brother and my sister, and now that I have 2 daughters, I'm praying man, I wonder what their relationship is going to be like. I pray they're close. I know a lot of how their upbringing plays into that.
It does.
I always ask that question, just kind of how, as a parent, do you see resemblance from your childhood to your kids?
Well, and a lot of it is the communication style of your parents and their ability to handle conflict, and how they handle conflict. Because with my parents, it was go somewhere and sit down. And, my mom could give that mama look where you would be frozen, and I had a big mouth. So, I caught a few backhands and the switch and, all kinds of stuff. Then, and my mom did not like confrontation at all. And in that day, you didn't argue or talk back. If your parents said to do something, whether you liked it or not, you didn't communicate, you just did it. And I promised myself I wouldn't raise my children that way. And, so I've had some really, tough times with my children, especially Evelyn, because she communicates like I communicate, like her hair's on fire. But I've always listened to her. And now that she's 19, we can have conversation about anything. I mean, absolutely anything. And I wish I would have had that openness with my mother. Now, my mother was a miracle. She lived 11 years with liver cancer. So, while she was walking through that journey, we got extremely close. But, to have her during those teenage years when I really needed to talk to her, would have been precious. It would have just been precious. But I got it. I got it in the end. So, but yeah, I think the way that we teach our children to handle conflict and communicate with each other, and resolve, because you're never going to agree on everything.
That's right.
You're never going to. And I think a lot of the rage and grief and issues we're seeing with these shooters is they're not learning how to resolve conflict and address problems. The problem of bullying. There's got to be a fix there. And that goes without saying that we need to address these gun issues in this country. But empowering and equipping our children to be able to communicate and say what they want and mean it and stand for it. Mm-hmm. That's a powerful place to be.
Yeah, and the root cause, some of the root cause is that anger.
Yes.
You know, when there's a lot of angry people, and I don't mean that in a negative sense, but they just really they're just angry. You know, from whether it's childhood stuff or just situations, and all it takes is that one time, you know, you just burst, and then you do something that you can't come back from, or it's hard to bounce back from. And I don't know what can be done. I know something can be done. I just don't know what, you know, to really help deal with conflict and deal with that anger that is there. So it's something you just have to, you know, be in prayer about. You mentioned St. Louis quite often. How did you get to St. Louis? I mean, I've been asking that. I'm like, you went from Springfield to St. Louis. How? There had to be a journey to get to St. Louis.
Well, I had a friend, a male friend, who moved to St. Louis for a computer for an IT job back in the day when, you know, I don't know if you remember when the cell phones, you carried the battery pack on your shoulder.
Back in
It's back in the day. So Monsanto actually recruited him, and I visited a few times, and it just fascinated me. So I had finished ICB, went to International College of Broadcasting, and was going to go into St. Louis and take radio by storm. And they weren't doing certificates in St. Louis. So I ended up, that's pushed me to go back to college. But yeah, I'm really blessed to have left. I'm glad that I got to see another part of the country, to really find out who I was, aside from, you know, what Springfield labeled me as, you know, growing up, even if that was in my own mind, and a lot of it was. Those voices, that unworthy voices in the back of my head. But it really got me to go to a place and really discover who I was and what I had to offer, and really explore different types of careers, from being, you know, an independent artist to, you know, I worked an internship with Citicorp. So, you know, I experienced the corporate side and worked in education. So it was a great 7-year adventure. But
Wow.
I'm glad I came home and got to spend, you know, the last years of life with my parents.
Yeah. When you know, and as we wrap up here, what do you see in Springfield now? Like, what's your hopes for Springfield? You know, how do you? Earlier you mentioned that there's still some forms of racism that still exist. You know, we can't be blind to that.
Right.
You know, there just is what it is. But just what's your vibe on Springfield now?
Yeah, Springfield has so much potential. I mean, you know, I was driving from Central State coming in on South Limestone, and I saw the new bridge, and, you know, Springfield's the home of 4-H, you know, and Springfield is a very innovative city. Of course, we know John Legend is from here, but there's been so many famous people and people who made an impact from Springfield. I mean, I don't know if you know the Hall brothers, who made suits for Mandela when he got out of jail and was president and visited the United States. They're from Springfield. You know, I mean, there's just so many people who are here and have grown up in this community, but there's so many disenfranchised people here that are not receiving the support and the resources that could really help them. And, you know, the history of Springfield, ask with the history of America, it was built broken, you know, and so now we have to look at, you know, kind of like the Leaning Tower of Pisa. So now that's iconic because it leans. You know, are we going to be satisfied because we're crooked? Or are we going to do some things to help shore up those weak spaces. And, Mrs. Ernestine Lucas, Mrs. Lucas, taught about the founding of Springfield. My grandmother's from Paris. She also knew one of her best friends was from Paris. And as a matter of fact, I drive my aunt to Paris about every year for our family reunion.
Wow.
Yeah. Paris, Kentucky.
I'm like, wow.
What?
Like,
Drive? But, when Springfield was really booming, in farm equipment and industry and Rose City, Champion City, there was a strike that happened in one of the major companies. And the union held the strike. Well, people went to Kentucky and brought in African Americans to break the strike. And that's where the racial tension in Springfield began. And they had little shanty towns built over by where Assurant is now, right in that Leffel Lane area. And then also, in the bottoms and, behind the Fountain Avenue houses, those grand houses, the High Street grand houses, they had the chauffeurs and the maids. They actually even had a club in Springfield, Black-owned, called Chauffeurs and Maids. And, there was a place for you if you were African American in Springfield, but you weren't allowed to step out of that place. Now, you could be grand in your own community, but don't come into Wren's and think you're going to sit at the counter. Don't come to the movies when you could go at all. My grandfather couldn't even go to the movies. Now, my dad could go, but there was a section for African Americans if you went to the movies in Springfield. And, in a lot of ways, that kind of mentality, that spirit still resides here. And so there's some really good work going on in the community to address it with the pastors. Samunye is really making an impact on the spiritual side, but on the practical side, we really have to look at, how we're interacting and interfacing to make everyone, equitable and include everyone in the dynamic of this community.
Yeah, that's I wonder if what would that look like on a practical side?
Oh man, it would be grand. It would be amazing. I mean, to think that, some of these businesses who have ideas could go to the bank, regardless of what color they were, and, meet the requirements and build their business. What would that do to the community? What would it do if our children, every child that started school, started off on equal footing and was given the resources that was needed to make sure they're successful? It would be grand. It would be amazing.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you. I do have one more question though.
Okay.
If we just dreaming out loud.
Mm-hmm.
There was one thing you would definitely want to see happen in Springfield. Like, what you'd be like, if I see this, Lord, my heart, you could take me on home. My heart will be content. What's the one thing?
I'd like to see economic empowerment on the South Side. Real economic empowerment.
So you mentioned you were an artist and you do spoken word. So share one with us.
Okay, I'm gonna share a part of the latest poem I wrote called "God Said Let," and it's from Genesis. Because in the beginning, before time flowed and vision rose from the darkness. God hovered above the void with choice, and voice broke silence and noise. Oh, he and they caused a chaotic disruption. Without hesitation, stepped into mayhem's chaos, sweetly, emphatically, and simply. God said, let. Not like asking for permission not granted yet, not like he needed to borrow or ask in fear of regret. In power and authority, God said, let. And visibly everything changed. By his declaration, this logos, the most profound cancellation of the void, danced in empty space when God said, let. Like that teacher who never yelled but ordered you to stand with a simple statement and the seeing reality glance, God said, let. Fluently speaking, fully filled emptiness permeated time's womb in intimate conception, then instant birth from a sterile universe. God said, let, and erased every impossibility for space to remain barren. With this divine declaration, in the beginning, he expelled his let, and now, in retrospect, he invites us to his courts to stand as witness. He peels back the curtain of time, takes the stage, and displays his ID. When word becomes flesh, when God says, let.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.